Alright, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about our new character, new 4-star, Guinaifen, which is also the only time I'm going to say her full name, which she'll now be called Miss Fen, who is going to be a fire character following the path of nihility. We're going to look at this character and analyze and see if she's good. So let's get into her kit. Starting off as per usual, the basic attack is just a single hit of damage, so we won't pay it too much mind. The skill though is where things get pretty hefty. So you hit a primary target and 2 adjacent enemies with a 100% base chance to cause the target and those adjacent enemies to be inflicted with burn. Very good burn application already. And then, when inflicted with burn, enemies will take fire dot damage equal to a certain percentage of Fen's attack at the beginning of each turn for 2 turns in total. And as we can surmise, she's going to be our resident burn applicator alongside Herta, the Trailblazer, and a Hook. So now we can have a full team of just burn applicators, which is always great. But the skill is only application. After that, we have the brunt of her kit, which is going to be the ultimate, which when red deals fire damage equal to a certain percentage to all enemies, and if the target is inflicted with the burn, then their burn status immediately deals damage equal to a certain percentage of the original damage it would have caused, and that certain percent is based on the level of the skill. And as we can all put together, her ultimate works practically the same as Kafka's, and you can play this character to the same degree. They are going to be a dot applicator, and then they're going to use a certain part of their kit, in this case it's the ultimate, to then pop those dots. The one thing I will say about Miss Fen here, opposed to Kafka, is that Fen only bursts burn stacks. Kafka is able to do it to all dot damage if it's bleed, wind shear, shock, burn. Kafka can do it to all of those. Fen can only do it to burn status, so be careful who you combo her with, because in the case of Kafka, Fen can assist Kafka, but Kafka cannot assist Fen, is the analogy I will use. But that's not where the meat of her kit stops. Going on to the talent, Patreon Benefits, which is quite a good name, as she is kind of like a, YouTuber, whatever the hell, content creator in lore-wise. But going on to this talent, when Fen is on the field, there is a 100% base chance to inflict a Fire Kiss on the enemy after the burn suffered by the enemy causes damage. While inflicted with Fire Kiss, the enemy receives 7% increased damage, which lasts for 3 turns and can stack up to 3 times, which is overall very good. Now, the 2 things to take away from this talent is that the burn effect can be triggered by any character's burn. It does not specifically have to be Fen's burn. The only thing that has to happen is Fen has to be on the field. As long as she's on the field and a burn is triggered, that enemy will get Fire Kiss. And the second thing is, Fire Kiss can go up to a total of 21% received damage increase to the enemy, but this damage increase is just broad damage increase. It's not a specific type, so this is a universal buff to every character that deals damage, as it doesn't specify dot, follow-up attack, burn, it doesn't specify anything. It's just a universal received damage increase, which is overall really good. Next, going on to the technique, she has quite a useful one. Immediately attacks the enemy after entering battle, deal damage for 4 times, with each time dealing fire damage equal to 50% of Fen's attack to a random enemy and inflicting Fire Kiss on them. Overall, you deal a fair bit of damage. It is a bit random, but if you know you're going into a single target fight, you can use this technique and immediately apply all Fire Kiss stacks from the start of the fight, which would prove quite beneficial for your opening damage. And then going on to the last 3 things of her standard kit, we have the bonus abilities. Number 1, Walking on Knives. Deal 20% more damage to enemies inflicted with burn. That's pretty standard for a Nihility burn character. They deal more damage to burn enemies, and so does the burn that procs. Very simple. On to ability 2, Bladed Hoop. When the battle begins, Fen's action is advanced by 25%. Generally speaking, she'll just go first 99% of the time, unless you have a character with ridiculous speed, as you'll also want to use most likely speed boots on Fen, plus the 25% advance forward at the beginning of a battle. She'll be going first 99% of the time, but do note that this is only a 1 time per battle thing, as it's at the beginning of a battle, not at the beginning of a round. And then lastly, the third ability, High Poles. Basic attacks have an 80% base chance of inflicting the enemy with burn, equivalent to that of the skill. That last part means to the same damage value of the skill, and overall, that is a fine ability. Your basic attack now has a chance to apply burn. We always love to see it. Overall, the bonus abilities are absolutely fine, and so is her standard kit. It's nothing too crazy, as we've seen this before through Kafka, and we have the 5-star variant already, but if you weren't able to get Kafka, this is a great substitute if you want to invest in this, as she'll be able to play similarly just through the burn element and at a slightly lower efficiency because of the ultimate only proccing burn statuses. But as well, if you do have Kafka, I would highly recommend investing in a Fen or a Guinaifen because she is going to be, I would say, one of the better picks for a Kafka team, along something like a Sampo, Kafka, and a Guinaifen. So overall, Guinaifen is a great character. Will you want to get her as just a random? Probably not, but if you're also rolling on the Topaz banner, which I assume Miss Fen is going to be on, then she's going to be a great addition as a fire DPS. But the character doesn't stop there. Onto the Eidolons. Starting off with Eidolon 1, slurping noodles during handstand, which is a spectacular name. When using the skill, there is a 100% base chance to reduce the attacked target enemy's effect resistance by 10% for 2 turns, overall increasing other Nihility characters or other dot application characters' effectiveness. Just generally speaking, you'll have a less higher restriction, or rather requirement, for effect hit rate if you have this specific Eidolon, but then again, it is an Eidolon requirement. But overall, a really good E1. Going on to E2, brushing teeth while whistling, which is rather hard to do. When the enemy target is burned, Fen's basic attack and skill increases the damage multiplier of her burn effect by 40%, which is pretty good in my opinion. You get a pretty hefty damage boost to the burn effect, which is overall what she does. On to Eidolon 4, blocking Pike with the neck, which is oddly painful. Every time the burn inflicted by Fen causes damage, Fen regenerates 2 energy. Overall, not too useful, as it does specify that Fen's burn has to be like the trigger for her to regenerate the energy. It's not just general burn that triggers this, so you're not going to be regenerating as much energy as you possibly could, but overall just a bit of energy regen as expected. And lastly, E6, catching bullet with hands, which is also rather difficult. Increase the stackable Fire Kiss count by 1, which makes that 21% received damage increase to enemies a 28% damage increase, which is overall pretty good. Not the best E6, I feel like this could have been an E1 or an E2, but I'm not going to complain as it is a 4-star character, and not a lot of these Eidolons are going to be too difficult to get in the long run. Now, I'm not going to make a recommendation too heavily about what Eidolon is the best value because she is a 4-star and most of these are going to be achievable like over the next few months. But if I was to recommend, E1 is where I'd stop because, well, it just helps the rest of your team as well as Fen herself by reducing the effect resistance of enemies by 10%, and in that way also reducing your character's requirement of effect hit rate if you want to look at it that way. Now, let's jump over to the light cones, where I will say that all of the 5-star light cones will work absolutely just fine. In the name of the world, patience is all you need. Incessant Rain and Solitary Healing are all absolutely spectacular choices for Fen to use because she's a DPS, and all of these increase your damage output through some way or another. But the one caveat I want to add is that Incessant Rain is going to be a bit more difficult to work with, as there is a requirement of 3 different dots on the enemy existing. And for this, you're going to need a specific team or a specific playstyle to actually get the full value of. But the other 3 5-star light cones are absolutely powerful for DPS, as they boost either debuffed damage or dot damage, speed, some way or another to boost efficacy. Where it gets a bit more finicky is the 4-stars. Now, my recommendations are going to be Good Night and Sleep Well and Eyes of the Prey. These 2 are going to be your best because they are DPS throughput increasing light cones. The other 4-stars are either a bit more utility, something that you would put on a Luca or a Paler, like Resolution Shines as Pearls of Sweat or Fermata. Those are a bit more utility based. And as for the other 2 Nihility light cones, one of them was a limited time event light cone, which I won't mention. As well, one of them is a battle pass, which I also will not recommend or mention, just because I'm not going to encourage payment. So my recommendations for the 4-stars is going to be Good Night and Sleep Well and Eyes of the Prey, because they are the 2 most DPS focused light cones. So if you have either of these at high refinements, by all means use one of these, but any of the 5-stars also work if you have them at your disposal. Second to last is obviously Relics. Firesmith of Lava Forging is obviously going to be the best in slot, as it is pure fire damage boosting, and that is all that Fen does. She does fire damage through her own skills as well as burn, which is going to give you the most value through Firesmith of Lava Forging. As for the planar ornaments, you have a fair few options in my opinion. Space Healing Station is most likely going to be your highest end game choice, but for early game I do personally recommend Pan Cosmic Commercial Enterprise, as effect hit rate is going to be pretty required in the early days, because in my opinion, applying the dot is much more important than just having a high value dot with low application rate. So until you can naturally get the high effect hit rate through the substats, I'd recommend Pan Cosmic Commercial Enterprise. But if you're personally not too bothered by maybe not applying a dot sometimes, Space Sealing Station is going to be the best in slot. After that, the other choices that Hakush here recommends are fine. They're a bit more generic choices, like Musketeer of Wild Wheat. Talia Kingdom of Banditry is also just a generic choice, and so is Thief Shooting Meteor. They're all very generic, but these other ones play to Fenn's strengths. As for stats, they're as you'd expect of a DPS character. You got attack percentage, because that's all that dot characters scale with. Crit rate and crit damage are not advised on the chest piece, as your dots can't crit. Speed is most likely going to be recommended for early days. In the end, attack percentage may end up being slightly better in the very high echelons of building once you get a perfect character, but speed is most likely the 99% recommendation. And then as you'd expect, fire damage boost and attack percent on the orb and the rope respectively. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward for a fire DPS character. And finally, going on to builds and just general final thoughts, Fenn plays the dot applicator role in the team. Now, generally speaking, you're most likely going to be running her with a Kafka. Kafka is mainly going to be the best dot, utilizer, and so Fenn is going to be a very good addition to a Kafka team. But if you're looking for a usage of Fenn as the main DPS or the main character in your team, then you're probably going to want to go for a full fire burn dot application team, which is most likely, hypothetically speaking, going to consist of Fenn as the main character, maybe with an Asta on the side, a Hook, Himiko, and some of these are substitutable with a Trailblazer in the fire element. Something along those lines is going to be along the best, because as we remember, Fenn can only pop burn status effects through her ultimate. She can't pop Wind Shear or Shock like Kafka can, so if you're looking to make Fenn the main DPS, you have to run her with primarily burn applicators to get the most value out of her character. But also, don't forget that Fenn's talent does increase the total damage received by enemies by 21% without Eidolons, so you can just run her as a generic support alongside other teams if you're not looking to use her as a main DPS. So you're quite free to play her in a lot of different comps, but primarily speaking, she's going to be a support to Kafka in the long run. And the character as a whole is pretty good in my opinion. I think Fenn is just a great 4-star Nihility character. She doesn't do anything too crazy, but the area that she does specialize in, I think she does really well in, which is just being a burn Nihility character. And so with that, I hope you guys did enjoy this guide, and I hope it was helpful. If it was, like and sub, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.